coffee's gonna get cold. Still tastes good though. Americanos, man. Hi, welcome to Games Over Coffee Consulting. This is where indie developers, I'm starting to just run that word together. Indie developers. It's like bacon, egg, and cheese. This is where indie developers submit their games and I do my best to give feedback on their game design. There's a link in the description. You can submit a game to me if you'd like. This is The Nature of Gravity that was submitted by Artificial. Let me just start this off. Let's just go ahead and go with this. So, this game is freaking great. I'm obviously biased because I just love action games, but on top of action games, I love platformers and puzzles. I like puzzle platformers, and I also like precision platformers. So this is basically all those things rolled into one. It's not an action so much, but it's a precision puzzle platformer, and that's just all me. So I really, really like this kind of stuff. I see a whole lot of potential in this game, and I know that this game was released, December last year, 2022, which, by the way, there's a link in the description for this game if you'd like to play it. I see a ton of potential in this game, but it does have some design things that we're going to talk about. I think this game is going to be amazing. The way that I see this game is kind of the way I see Celeste when it was made for the Pico 8, but then it was, remastered into this one big game that everyone knows. I feel like the same thing could be done with this game, with The Nature of Gravity, that it can be made into something much bigger with much more detail and much more polish and everything like that. But I really think that you have something here. I really think that this game can be something big. So the things we're going to talk about are going to be level design, gravity switching, and the difficulty curve. Just to start this off, the level designing here is so good. I have to give props where props are due, because this is really impressing me with how dense the level is. Such ingenuity. Like, it just feels like there's a lot of thought put into the process of playing these levels, and I thought that was really, really cool. In the first level, I love that it's just, regular platforming, that you introduce that just as a thing first. I like that in the second level that you have the little arrows that you collect. I like that the first one that you collect, I like that it's unavoidable, basically, that you have to drop onto it. I thought that was brilliant. And then the fact that you have to use it to get back up, but all these platforms are in your way, requiring the player to move and learn. I love that. Really, really love that. And there's so many different times in here that kind of design, that kind of level design that teaches itself is really apparent, and I really love that kind of stuff. Really good job. Some of these things I thought were amazing. One of them was this little placement of the flag right here, and now you have to be on the same plane as the flag in order to complete the level. And I don't know if this was on purpose, but the flag here in this level was placed in a way where the player can still touch the flag but not complete the level, meaning they have to understand that they have to get onto the same plane of the flag in order to touch it and complete the level. I thought that was brilliant. And then there was this row of spikes that's at a 90-degree angle, which just by looking at it, you immediately understand that you have to swap gravity in between, that you have to swap gravity while you're falling. Like, there's no other way to complete the level other than to do that. And again, that's just looking at the level and understanding, and I just love that design. So really, really good job on the level design. Now that we got all the love out of the way, I need to get to the feedback and the critique of this whole thing, the whole purpose of this video. This type of genre is absolutely my type of genre. I clicked with it very quickly, and it was actually really difficult for me to go back and analyze exactly how I was feeling during those gameplay moments. I played this on my Mac with a controller. I also played it on the Mac with a keyboard, and then I also played it on my Steam Deck. I thought it worked really well with the keyboard, weirdly enough, and I think it was designed with the keyboard in mind. Anyway, this felt better on a keyboard, which is kind of weird. I'd rather play on the Steam Deck or play on like a controller. The first critique that I have is about the gravity switching mechanic itself. When I first played the game and I tried to figure out how to switch gravity in the first place, I like that there's like a UI element in here that shows you when you're holding the gravity switching button down at the bottom left. There's a little X, I think that's an X. I felt like, okay, well, I've played gravity swapping platformers before, figured I know how to play this one, but this one is different. So this one you have to jump first, and then you can swap gravity. That kind of was weird for me to get used to. I wasn't sure why you couldn't just swap gravity immediately. I like the idea. The idea is really interesting to have like a selection of different types of gravity when you jump. I thought that was really interesting. But I couldn't get over the fact that you had to jump in order to initiate the gravity swap. There were many times where I was just walking in the level that I felt like, okay, well, now I want to swap gravity. Why do I have to jump first? Like, I just wanted to swap it just right there. The other thing that got on my nerves was like when I jumped to swap gravity, I would have to hold the button and then I wanted to figure out which direction I was going, but I have 1 second to figure it out until my character falls again. So I have to know which direction I'm going to swap before jumping. Now that was not that bad of a deal. Like I said, this game really connected with me and I really clicked with it super fast. So like these problems that I had were super small, but they were still humps to get over. And I feel like to someone who's not a precision platformer person like me, they would probably have a lot more problems with this. This would probably slow them down a whole lot. And of course, if you slow down someone, a lot while they're playing a game, then they're not going to want to play it anymore, right? It causes friction, and you don't want that kind of friction in a game. I have to ask why gravity swapping just isn't available just by itself, and why you have to jump in order to do it. I think what you were thinking, I'm going to completely guess here. I'm thinking that while you thought about this game's mechanics, that you thought about the idea of jumping and shifting gravity in between a platforming challenge, because there's a lot of times in this game that there are tiny little precision challenges, and I love that, by the way. But when I play it, I feel like those should be two separate things. I feel like gravity swapping should be another tool on our belt. So you have platforming and you have gravity swapping. I think that the gravity swapping should be used with the platforming as a challenge, kind of. And there was a few times that you had that where there were times where I felt like I needed to use both of these things at the same time. But those times were amazing, right? Those times where I'm like, oh, there's spikes over there, I need to jump and then use my gravity swapping. Like that was a problem solving technique that I had to do rather than just being a requirement, right? Rather than just being like, oh, okay, I know I need to jump in order to use the gravity swapping. I like the idea of having it as a problem that needs to be solved rather than something that the player needs to do, right? I mean, it is a puzzle platformer anyway. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the difficulty curve. You said you had some problems with people were finding some things too difficult. One of the things that you did was increase the amount of time I think that someone could freeze in the air and then have it move in slow motion also. That was a neat thing that you did. I'm not sure if that actually solves the difficulty curve problem. I believe it's too difficult because this is basically a 30 to 45 level game squished into 15 levels. I think that there's probably too many things that you're teaching at once. I think if you were to stretch this out, spending a lot more time incrementing every little thing that the player needs to do and teach them things much slower, I think that would help, a whole lot. I think the way that you teach in the very beginning is very good. Like I said before, the level design is really good. The first level is great. The second level is also great. But again, that gravity switching mechanic, I would take that, make it its own thing, and maybe spread it around 4 different levels. For example, the first thing that you do is teaching the player is how to platform, right? So you give them a little tiny platforming challenge and then let them do it. And then you increase that challenge by having greater risk involved. So instead of just falling off the platforms and having to start over, add some spikes that have instant death. Maybe another time add 2 layers of spikes, 3 layers of spikes, or whatever. Maybe in one level have it so that you can't jump so high. Maybe there's more risk. Each time you're introducing more and more risk and growing that skill for the player. By the time this ends, the player will feel like they've mastered that kind of mechanic. As with any platformer, mastery is the goal, right? You want your player to feel like they have mastered the mechanics. The whole idea is to get the player to grow with confidence. That's what teaching is all about. And so I think it's just lengthening that curve, basically. If you were to just have the gravity swap as its own mechanic, then you would, start to do just the gravity swapping, and then another one that's gravity swapping, but this time it's 2 different ways. Then maybe another one that you introduce platforming with gravity swapping, and then platforming with gravity swapping 2 different ways, and then continue that route so that you're challenging the player just a little bit more, introducing a little bit more risk each time, increasing the amount of things that the player needs to do for each level. If we look back at Celeste, at the way that they made their levels in the Pico 8, a lot of what they did was pretty incremental challenging. The first level being that you only had to use your double jump. The second level introducing something a little bit more, third level a little bit more, fourth level a little bit more, and then you keep going, but then there's a point to where, all the elements have been introduced. You've introduced plungers and balloons and moving platforms and spikes. So what else can you do? Well, you introduce more risk, more steps that the player has to do in order to complete that challenge. This level that was really aggravating for me in Celeste had me use the dash 3 times in a row. And the difficulty with that is that it's hard to, use the dash and then land again so that you can use the dash again after that. So that's a lot of risk, right? All of that in that single level. I haven't had to do this many dashes and that many times before, but that's the idea, is that its curve is going up and it's challenging the player more and more using the same mechanics. It's just increasing the amount of risk involved. I found this article on Game Developer. There's a link in the description about game progression. It's really good. But I think that's basically what needs to happen throughout the whole game. We already described how the first 3 levels could essentially be, around 8 to 10 levels, basically. There's times that I felt like the design was a little too convoluted for its own good. In level 6, it was interesting because I had to learn picking up a key in the air and then using that key immediately while I was in the air. And I had to learn this while gravity had been swapped to the left, rather than just regularly on the ground. Level 7, the next level, had the same challenge, but it was on the ground and it was much easier to understand. There's a bunch of times that these levels, teach just a little too much at once. The first time that you learn how to switch blocks so that they start falling everywhere, you learn with, I think it's like 15 blocks or something like that. And the whole level is pretty open, so the blocks can go just about anywhere. It leaves a lot of room for error, which means that anyone who's here that doesn't know exactly what they're doing can mess up pretty easily. And then if they keep messing up, they'll keep messing up over and over and won't figure it out as fast. The way to introduce that more, gradually would be to lower the amount of error. And I think one of the ways that you've actually already done this was one of the levels where you're controlling the blocks, but they only have a very limited space in which they can move. That's one of the things that I would spend a lot more levels doing, is maybe having the player only move 1 block at once, and then a few blocks at a time, and then opening the space a little bit more. So instead of just having them shift from left to right, maybe now they're shifting up to down, or maybe now they're shifting in a S pattern like you had in that one level. Those types of levels can be, again, really gradual. If you think about Portal does, like everyone knows from now, it's like almost one giant tutorial. Even in Portal, you think about the first level doesn't even use portals. When you get to the first test chamber, it's just about placing a block on a switch. And then you don't actually get the portal gun with both portals at the same time until much later in the game. If you think about the type of mechanic that you really want the player to mess around with, and this is the type of thing that you want to build a game with, make sure to introduce that bit by bit until the player can build all the knowledge that they need in order to master the amount of control that they have, so that they can go on and do all the challenges that you have in your mind. That can be a pretty hard thing to do for some developers because they're thinking already with a bias, right? And that's why playtesting is so important. Like I said, this game I think is really, really, really good and has the potential to be really great. All it needs is a lot more incremental teaching, basically. Incremental teaching and incremental challenges. That is all I got to say then. So thank you again to this person for submitting this game. If you have a game that you want to submit, you can do so in the link in the description, or you can go to gamesover.coffee and click on the Submit Your Game button. And that's it. I'll see you later.